I'm a bad motherfucker.
They were
Back to Jimmy.
they were getting their rocks off because another news organization screwed up for a change, and it wasn't them. I'm talking about the Intercept people.
Yeah.
To see people like Ryan Grimm try to call anyone else out for their bad reporting.
Well, that was Ryan Grimm and Jeremy Scahill, right?
Was that Jeremy Scahill too?
Yeah, they both wrote that. It was a dual. I think 3 people wrote it. That must have cost them like $2 million to publish that article.
Are you kidding me? Well, I'm definitely not covering it then.
Yeah, it was 3 people wrote
it. Was Jeremy. Oh, look at the new light on Russ.
Boom. Now I won't look so damn drunk anymore.
Jeremy Scahill is like the Bernie Sanders of, or the Cornel West of journalists now. Once he got a light shined on him, it showed all the cracks in his personality. And Jeremy Scahill is, I love when he acts tough, like he's really telling you the truth, right up until a certain point. Right up until a certain point. Anyway. Remember when you could keep the fellas on over my shoulder? Remember when we used to have heroes in journalism? Remember that?
Yep.
Oh,
yeah, Scahill was
we still have some.
back in the day.
We still have some.
We still have some. Glenn Greenwald. I still have a big
Matt. I love
Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate.
Blumenthal, Aaron. Yeah.
Oh, by the way, congratulations. Oh, I should do a story by. We should have brought him on. We'll do it Monday. Max Blumenthal won the. I'm blanking on the name of the award. I tweeted it out.
No, you tweeted it out earlier.
It's the spray.
It was the discus throw, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Aaron Mate had previously won the same one.
I was say he found the matzah this year, right?
It's the what's that?
What's the matzah that you find the Passover? You know the name.
The Homan coffin.
The Homan coffin. He found the Homan coffin.
Where is it? He would the Peer Spray Award is what Max Blumenthal won. Top prize goes to Max Blumenthal. That's what they say. Top prize. Almost all reports on the current U.S.-backed Israeli war in Gaza come to us heavily laced with misinformation and lies. That is why the work of Max Blumenthal, who has the benefit of in-depth reporting on Israel and Gaza's previous wars, in the gray zone has been not only invaluable, which also means valuable, but also just like flammable.
It's fancy valuable.
It's fancy valuable. Isn't that funny that flammable and inflammable mean the same thing?
Yeah.
Why do you
That's
part?
Right. Inflammable does mean.
Why do you part?
Well,
I never realized inflammable means flammable. You know, that's something you really want to be certain of. When you read like a warning label on a product, you really want to know whether it's flammable or not. They shouldn't be vague about that.
I think isn't it
not flammable?
Is it? So yeah, it's so it's like inflammable means flammable, right? Let me ask Suri.
Mm-hmm.
And then same thing with and same thing with invaluable means valuable.
Well, it's because English is such a melange of different languages that that's why you have such weird spelling, so many inconsistencies, such a broad vocabulary within English because it's drawing on so many different elements.
It's actually inflammable. I thought it was im. No, it's in.
No, inflammable. Yeah.
Inflammable means flammable. That's good to know.
Just like invaluable.
Potentially very good to know.
Inflammable, easily set on fire.
Wow.
The words inflammable and flammable both have the same meaning. Easy to set on fire. Well,
yeah, that's really a reckless.
You'd think they would have cleaned that up by now.
You'd think they would.
You think
there must have been so many conversations with like a homeowner's insurance. It said it was inflammable. No, inflammable means flammable.
I thought that meant it couldn't be. It was fireproof.
Inflammable, the same thing. Oh, yeah.
Why do you park in a driveway and drive in a parkway?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Hey, we have some good news. Rochdale by-election results live. Landslide win for George Galloway as Labor condemns MPs as damaging force. So George Galloway, who's a friend of this show we've had on, he's one of the truth tellers over there when he was in the Parliament in the UK, and then he was doing the mother of all talk shows, which I've been a guest on several times. And here he is with his victory speech. Now he's going to be a member of the UK Parliament now. This is great.
Keir Starmer, this is for Gaza. You have paid and you will pay a high price for the role that you have played in enabling, encouraging, and covering for the catastrophe presently going on in occupied Palestine in the Gaza Strip.
You know, maybe it would help if you got rid of Tommy, the pinball wizard, behind you. Maybe you don't need that guy. What the? But anyway, I'm big fan of George Galloway. We're very proud. And so that, by the way, this really bothered the establishment, so much so that the prime minister came out and said this.
In recent weeks and months, we have seen a shocking increase in extremist disruption and criminality. What started as protests on our streets has descended into intimidation, threats, and planned acts of violence. Jewish children fearful to wear their school uniform lest it reveal their identity. Muslim women abused in the street for the actions of a terrorist group they have no connection with. Now our democracy itself is a target. Council meetings and local events have been stormed.
But I think it's interesting that he says that he tries to be like he's even-handed. Muslim women attacked in the streets for a terrorist group they have no association with. But he doesn't say Jewish people attacked for a genocide that they don't have anything to do with. Isn't that interesting? Right. He doesn't make that connection. Okay, here we go. But here comes the part about George Galloway.
MPs do not feel safe in their homes. Long-standing parliamentary conventions have been upended because of safety concerns. And it is beyond alarming that last night the Rochdale by-election returned a candidate who dismisses the horror of what happened on October the 7th, who glorifies Hezbollah, and is endorsed by Nick Griffin, the racist former leader of the BNP.
So do you see how they're trying to discredit him? Oh, it's alarming. It's alarming that George Galloway doesn't go along with the genocide in Gaza. It's alarming that George Galloway doesn't go along with the destruction of Libya. It's alarming that George Galloway didn't go along with the Iraqi genocide and the millions slaughtered in Iraq. That's what he's saying, because you want to see what gets them upset is that George Galloway won't go along with Israel. And he tells the truth about Israel. So, and they call it alarming and shocking, and they try to discredit him as some kind of racist. Want to hear how racist he is? This is what scares them. The truth he's about to tell about Israel. This is what scares them. This is what caused them to say that.
A couple of nights ago, and you were talking to the...
So this is him hosting his mother of all talk shows, and a Zionist calls in, and we'll listen to his response.
To these people, and they were saying that Israel, the Jews did not have the right to gain Israel from the Palestinians. And I was just saying, throughout history, the Jews have been persecuted, obviously, from the Holocaust, and we were granted Israel as a result of this. And I feel that...
granted by whom?
We were granted from Britain and other countries, granted us that.
But what right did Britain have to grant you somebody else's country?
Well, it's due because we lost 6 million people.
No. I'm not arguing about that. I'm going to come on to that. But what right did Britain have to grant you somebody else's country?
We had the right because we lost 6 million people and we did not have a home.
Well, I'm going to ask you for a third time. What right did Britain have to grant you somebody else's country?
Well, they didn't. Well, they were giving us the right because it was they were basically gave us because of the
But they gave you somebody else's country. That's the point I'm making, Alex. Can you deal with it?
Yeah, but the Jews have also had to they've dealt with it throughout history.
Well, Alex, I don't know if you came on with a script and you can't deviate from it. Can you please answer that point? And we'll come to the Holocaust and who was responsible for it and who should have paid and what they should have paid for it. But given that you've said Britain granted you, and you're presumably saying you because you're Jewish, somebody else's country, I'm asking you, what right did Britain have to grant you somebody else's country?
Well, Britain, you could say they didn't have a right, but they came in and dealt with us and with Jews having lost all these lives. And
well, you could say they didn't have a right, but they did it. They did it anyway.
They did it anyway, yeah.
But they came in and they did it. So that's it. It's done.
Wow.
So it gets even better. There's a little bit more of this.
Granted us this land. Okay.
Well, I see I'm getting nowhere on this, Alex, so let me deal with your overarching point. Maybe you're just not equipped to deal with the principal point that I have made. The Jews have suffered racist anti-Semitism down the ages in many, many European countries, including our own. They were subject to regular discrimination at best, and pogrom and murder at most. That's undoubtedly true. The one place in the entire world that Jews were neither discriminated against nor subject to pogrom was the Muslim world. In fact, so much was that the case that when Christianity came back to power in Spain, in Andalusia, in the western extent of the Islamic Empire, when the Muslims left, the Jews left with them because they feared the Christian anti-Semitism which would be unleashed in the wake of the departure of the Islamic civilization in the West. That's why so many Jews are to be found even today, and were to be found in profusion before the creation of the State of Israel, in countries like Morocco and along the North African coast, because under the protection of the Muslims, the Jews left Europe and went to live in North Africa. The Palestine that was wiped off the map when Britain granted you somebody else's country had Jews living side by side with Christians and Muslims for century upon century, without the slightest trace of discrimination or violence or pogrom. So, what's happened is that Christian anti-Semitism in Europe, which massacred 6 million Jews in the greatest crime in human history, was paid for not by the Christian countries of Europe that either practiced or turned a blind eye to that anti-Semitism, but was paid by the very people who were completely innocent of that Holocaust, who had never persecuted the Jews, who never pogromed the Jews. And that seems to me to add insult to the injury suffered by a people whose country was wiped off the map, who were dispersed into exile, to make way for a Zionist idea which was granted to European Jews, because these were the first settlers, granted to European Jews by Britain. And as you have singularly failed, 4 times I asked you, to acknowledge that Britain had no right to give away somebody else's country, one country giving to a second people the land that actually belonged to a third people, it seems to me an all-round injustice, don't you think, Alex?
Yeah, I agree that they didn't so much have the right, but they were stepping in after the Holocaust to grant it to the Jews. But it was
long before the Holocaust that Britain stepped in. Britain stepped in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration made by the British Minister Balfour on our behalf to a group of atheistic Zionist Jews. I make the point about atheism because it's now claimed that this is some biblical land right, as if God was an estate agent. The men to whom Israel was promised were atheistic Jews. They were not only not speaking for all Jews, they represented at that time in 1917 a tiny proportion of the world's Jews. Most of the world's Jews supported communist or socialist parties and ideas at that time. The Zionists represented a tiny sliver of Jewish opinion at that time. Yet, Balfour promised them the land which belonged to a third people, without consulting either the British or the world's Jews, and least of all, consulting the Palestinians.
Okay, well, thanks very much for talking.
Okay, Alex, thanks for listening.
Okay, thanks. Okay, shit, I gotta go. I gotta run. Thank you.
I left something on the stove.
So that is what scares the hell out of the establishment. A guy like him, George Galloway, is actually going to tell you the truth and the history behind Israel and Zionism and the conflict that's happening right now, the genocide. I don't want to underplay it, call it a conflict. It's a flat out genocide of murdering by many different means. One by bombing and another by starvation. And they're doing it, that's group punishment, and they're doing it against innocent children. 1 million of the people who live in Gaza are children, and they're starving them on purpose. And the people of Israel, most of them are okay with it. The people who are not okay with it, the Hasidic Jews, get beaten up by the Zionist police inside Israel. I can't show the video on YouTube because they demonetize it. But so that's what scares the hell out of it. So just never forget, just like they're afraid of Julian Assange, not because he lied, they're afraid of Julian Assange because he's telling the truth. Same thing with George Galloway. They're not afraid of George Galloway because he's lying about Israel and he's lying about Gaza and the Palestinians. They're afraid because he's telling the truth, which is why they have to immediately discredit them. So let me bring in Keaton and Russ, and what do you have to say about George Galloway and what I just showed you?
Well, that was epic. I mean, there's a famous video of George Galloway. I just DM'd it to you, Jimmy, where this was years and years ago, where he found out that a debate partner was Israeli. He showed up for an in-person debate at a lecture hall, and the guy at the very beginning mentions that he's Israeli, and George Galloway says, "I don't recognize Israel. I don't debate Israelis," and walks out. Just leaves the crowd. That's it. No debate. He should debate them more often because he's obviously very good at it. Yes. So we really need his skill set there. In preparation for this segment, because I knew we were going to do this, I watched on YouTube some of the mainstream English press in response to this. They hate this guy, man. Mm-hmm. Holy shit. You think the American press was tough on like Bernie or something? Like, they cannot stand this guy. And what it really gave me insight into, like, their mainstream media over there is probably even worse than ours. I mean, we've seen that. We've seen, that Talk TV host, that woman who constantly meltdown after meltdown after meltdown. Do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn Hamas? And then those two guys that I think it was Jackson Hinkle went on and tore apart, that you had him on the show reacting to that. I mean, the media over there is just awful, and they obviously cannot stand this guy. Oh, he's a charismatic person, but he's simplistic, and he paints things in very black and white, unsophisticated terms, implying that he appeals to like stupid people. Again, hiding behind the cover of this is all very complicated. And as he just demonstrated in that debate, if you want to call it one, it's not complicated at all. You could take these arguments apart in 2 seconds, and he did.
Yeah, it's really incredible how they've distorted the history, because I've seen Zionists say, yes, and the Jews had to pay a special tax in Muslim lands. Okay, first of all, that was very unevenly enforced. And second of all, can you tell me what was happening in Christian Europe around that time to Jews?
Right.
I think we call that the fucking Inquisition, you morons. You talk, but they'll make it sound like, oh, they were horribly discriminated against in the Muslim world in the Middle Ages. And very often, actually, the Muslims imposed that tax on their own people and not on Jews and Christians because they wanted to stimulate trade with Europe. But that aside, so, I was just in London, and the first place I got booked had no Wi-Fi. Which they kind of buried in the fine print. So we have a channel patron, Ian Puddick, who has this beautiful old gin house that he rents as an Airbnb that he gave me for free. And he was very friendly with George Galloway, and he was working on the campaign. So I am very glad for him and for George. To see them win. He was doing a lot of work for Galloway while I was there. But one of the first interviews I did was with a bunch of British guys outside of the Royal Court of Justice, where the Assange hearings were taking place. And I was asking them about freedom of speech in England. And I was mentioning, hey man, I came with a press pass in my baggage. There were certain shirts and things I did with certain slogans I chose not to bring, because I know there have been weird cases of people being arrested for, being autistic and saying the wrong thing. And, they said, everyone I spoke to basically said the same thing about this, that there is no freedom of speech per se, but as a result, it's very arbitrary. Like, you might get in trouble saying something in one situation and not in another. It really depends on whether someone calls the authorities and reports you. Like, people can report you for things you say in England, and then it's up to the authorities whether they want to pursue it. But there have been some absolutely horrific cases. Now, I say that because I watched the entire speech of the Prime Minister before we came on, because I knew we were doing this. And that speech is terrifying. All right. Rishi Sunak is neoliberalism by way of identity politics made flesh. He is this wealthy scion of privilege who hides behind his Indian identity and is trailblazing identity as the first non-white prime minister, which he mentions in that speech, in order to push the most class and economic devoid type of politics and to focus on this us versus them. It's a bunch of racists who have the position that these people have, and we have to come together. The most noble thing in Britons is we've come together as a people, and we have Britons from all different backgrounds. He did not say one word about class or economics in that entire speech. And as an American, this is a very familiar formulation. And that's somewhat sad and disappointing to see that Britain is so much in the grip of this same hollow neoliberal kind of politics that makes everything about culture wars and racism and racists, and any populist movement, any democratic movement, any success at the polls by someone like George Galloway that they detest becomes a national emergency of racism. It's a crisis of racism. When what could be more racist than to be standing up for a settler colonial project against the Arab people of Palestine? But the things that he suggests doing at the end of that speech are terrifying because they don't have a First Amendment. And yes, clearly we don't live up to our own First Amendment, but in the end, you have a law that you can actually point to and say, this suppression of my speech is illegal. They do not have any such law there. So it is very frightening when you have the prime minister talking about convening task forces to characterize their political opponents as racists and to take action against them when they already enforce actions against people for saying the wrong thing when they feel like it.
Here's a little bit more of that speech. So just, I don't have the end where you're talking about the scary part. I watched the whole thing. It was about 10 minutes long.
Right.
But here, listen to this garbage. It sounds like George Bush. These people sound just like George Bush did. And anybody, I'll just play it for you.
And hope. We must not allow that to happen. When these groups claim that Britain is and has been on the wrong side of history, we should reject it and reject it again.
Because it's true. They have been on. When has Britain ever been on the right side of history? They're on the, just in most recent history, in the last 20 years, they're on the wrong side of history in Iraq. They're on the wrong side of, they're on the wrong side of history in Libya. They're on the wrong side of history in Syria. They're on the wrong side of history when it came to COVID. They're on the wrong side of history when it comes to Ukraine. And now they're on the wrong side of history when it comes to Gaza and Israel. They've always been on the wrong side of history. When have they ever been on the right side of history? Can you guys think of a time when Britain has been on the right side of history?
It is quite remarkable because you hear from a lot of conservative voices in England that England has completely given into the idea of being ashamed of its past. And yet I go to the British Museum and, which is just full of everything the British stole from all around the world. And the narratives around those things are, and yes, this temple was falling into ruins and it was given as a gift by the Ottomans so that we could take care of it for them. There is not, I was actually a little surprised by how self-justifying their little explanation cards were in all of these things. I mean, you go through the Egyptian Hall of Mummies, I'm sure Egypt would love to have those back. I mean, they literally have the mummies laid out there.
So that's the kind of stuff he was saying. That, these people have you believe that Britain's on the wrong side of history. You are. Let's just for kicks. Let's listen to a little more.
No country is perfect, but I am enormously proud of the good that our country has done.
Yeah, Greece still wants its Parthenon back.
No country's perfect. Come on. So we were the world's colonizers. Whoopsie daisy. Okay, it was a little bit more.
Our place in history is defined by the sacrifices our people have made in the service of their own freedom and that of others.
Did you know that Britain's history is all about them sacrificing for of their freedom and for other people's freedoms? I didn't know that.
That's just remarkable.
That's the kind of people who demonize. That's the kind of bullshit artists that demonize George Galloway, and they're afraid of him. Why? Because these people are all full of shit. They're liars. This guy stands to make like $500 million off of the genocide that's happening in Gaza right now. That guy who's just talking to you, this guy right here, and his family are poised to make, I think, somewhere around $500 million. And that's why he's now the head of the country. But
he's not white, Jimmy. He's not white. Don't you see that is progress by definition? That we're moving towards a brighter future because the person playing the same colonial imperial games is not white. Don't you see the progress in that? That's what he said, but pretty much during that speech too. He's talking about, come on, we're not racist. Look at me. Right. That's what he's there for. That's exactly what he's there for, just like Barack Obama.
That's right. That's right. Anything you'd like to add, Keaton?
No, I mean, it's just he's Rishi Sunak. He's got to be Indian, right? It's just amazing.
Yeah.
So
Indian.
Yeah, an Indian guy saying, "When has Britain ever been on the
wrong side of history?" You can't make this stuff up. It's amazing. Yeah. Okay. All right. Over to Steph.
All right. Thank you, Jimmy.
I'm Josh Shakespeare.
I'm Chris Keene.
And this is pretty bad news. California homeless people were found living in caves 20 feet below street level. Apartments.com have listed the caves at $2,300 with utilities included.
After a San Francisco area school hired a company called Woke Kindergarten to train teachers, they reported some of the lowest reading scores in the state. To be fair, it's hard to teach people how to read when every word is offensive.
Hey, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there for more AM Joy.